That concludes. Both presidents will give separate news conferences. White House officials did not want to appear side by side with Putin. This is just one example of how the personal dynamics here in Geneva are so important. The two presidents clearly are not friends. Joe Biden believes, and he has said so publicly, that Vladimir Putin is a killer without a soul. CNN is live here in Geneva. We're covering this history-making summit from every single angle. Let's begin this hour's special coverage with our chief international correspondent, Clarissa Ward, and our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, who's with us as well. Clarissa, certainly a lot at stake right now, where we're waiting for this second larger meeting to break up. The first one went more than an hour and a half, the smaller session. This could go on for a while.
The first one went 93 minutes, just a little longer than was expected. This one, we don't know how long it will go. Certainly, if it goes longer, there will be the hopes that some agreements are starting to be made. It'll be interesting to find out afterwards when the tough conversations were had, when the uncomfortable conversations were had. Were they held in that smaller session with just Putin and Biden and their respective secretaries of state, or were they held in the larger format? Certain issues that we expect to hear perhaps about in terms of potential areas of dialogue, agreement, moving forward, making the relationship more predictable, as both sides are hopeful they'll be able to do. Climate change is one. Potential prisoner swap between the two sides is another. Syria, Afghanistan, Iran. There are a lot of areas where the two sides could come together, but certainly everyone has been very clear. The expectations are low. Russians say they're looking for a relationship that would be still hostile, but at least respectful. And again, that key word, predictability. Trying to get some element of predictability back into the relationship and avoid a situation where it degrades further. The
U.S.-Russian relationship, Jim, clearly has been strained now for a while. Cyber attacks, that's obviously a huge issue. Ukraine. Russian interference in U.S. elections in 2016, in 2020. There are a lot of problems in this relationship.
No question. You might even use the word crisis to describe it, because these issues reached such a crescendo, right? Particularly cyber attacks, right? With cyber attacks in the U.S. that people watching right now might have felt the impacts of. For instance, gas shortages based on this attack on the Colonial Pipeline. So real divisions, and not just tensions, but also consequences to the problems between the two of them. And what's interesting about those words that we keep hearing, the operative words of stability, predictability, is that speaks as well to the urgency that both sides view these talks, that they felt they did need to get together, meet face to face, and do so quickly so that they could attempt to at least pull themselves back from the precipice of some of these conflicts escalating to a point where then you lose control. You know, Biden has spoken many times in his political career about the war that you don't want, ending up in a situation where you escalate beyond what your intentions were initially. So he's aware of that danger. Clearly, Putin is as well, and that appears to be why they chose to sit down today. Whether they're able to accomplish that, achieve that greater stability, we don't know, but there's certainly an intent there.
And it's all business today for these two leaders, Clarissa. They're having smaller meetings, bigger meetings, but they're not having dinner together or anything along those lines. It's strictly business, and that's deliberate.
It's very deliberate. It's both sides are going out of their way, primarily for their domestic audiences, I think, to really emphasize we're not friends. This isn't a reset. No one's going to hug it out here. That's not what this is about. This isn't about trying to change the fundamental characterization of the relationship, which is an adversarial one. What this is about is preventing the train from coming off the tracks, just pulling up that handbrake a little bit, if you will. And President Putin, you know, he has big parliamentary elections coming up in September. That last raft of sanctions targeting sovereign debt, that's a very clear warning shot to him. He has reasons as well for not wanting this to deteriorate further. He would also like to see some stability and predictability injected into things.
Our chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins, is on the scene over there at the Villa Lagrange, not far from where we are here in Geneva as well. I understand you're getting some new information, Caitlin, about what's going on in this session that's underway right now.
Yeah, so right now, Wolf, this is the second session of the meeting that they had. They took a little bit of a break in between that first session that was basically a 2-on-2 with each having their top 8 in the room. For President Biden, that was the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. Now they're in the expanded meeting where there are 6 people from each delegation on each side. So President Biden is not only joined by his Secretary of State, but also his National Security Advisor, one of his 2 Russia directors at the National Security Council, one official who is effectively the third-ranking diplomat at the State Department, who we should note also worked in the Obama administration, is well steeped in Ukraine affairs. That seems to send a message to what they are talking about today. And of course, there is a lot on the list of tensions at the for the topics that they have to discuss. Ukraine is just one of many of those. And so one thing that we do note from these photos, Wolf, is you can see that the officials are now wearing earpieces. That allows for that simultaneous translation of the comments being made between both sides. So basically, it allows the conversation to move a lot faster than what we saw in that meeting earlier when it was President Biden and President Putin in the room, and one of them would make remarks and then the interpreter from the other side would translate it for them, and then they react in a little bit of a delayed fashion. And so you're seeing these meetings get underway, and we're still waiting to find out if they've actually addressed the substance of their differences, which is, of course, what the White House said they came here to do, because, reminder, this is a meeting that President Biden initiated. He invited Putin to have this summit. They worked out the details for several months before actually coming out and confirming it, because, of course, typically these negotiations between the Russian side and the U.S. side can go on for several weeks. And as it did with the format here for today, it went on essentially up until the last minute. One thing we should note about who is in the room for this, Wolf, is several of those advisors that you see sitting next to the Russian president are a lot of his inner circle closest aides that were also present in Helsinki for that meeting with former President Trump in 2018. Of course, now we have a new president. He has a new delegation, and he is seeking to essentially establish a different kind of relationship with Russia, much different than what his predecessor had. But I think the question here is that what's confronting them are not just old challenges, which are ones like nuclear arms control. That's something that President Biden has been dealing with since he was a senator in the late 1970s, but also new challenges facing them, including cybersecurity and these ransomware attacks that we have seen really come to the forefront of this agenda. Not something you probably would have expected a decade or so ago. And so whether or not they actually move the ball on that is really a big question facing them. But we'll find out when they each hold their respective press conferences. And I think the big question right now is how much longer these talks are going to go on. We have not gotten an indication that this first meeting has ended. We're waiting for the second bigger meeting to actually happen. And we'll get a good idea then, I think, of just what kind of progress the two sides are making in these talks. But we should remind our viewers, expectations are low while tensions are high between these two sides.
Tensions are very high. And very quickly, Caitlin, do we know after they wrap up their actual discussions which president will have a news conference first, which will go second, or will they do it before their respective news media organizations at the same time?
Right now, we don't expect them to be at the same time. We have heard from White House officials who have said they want President Putin to go first. Obviously, that is so they can have the advantage of hearing his version of what just happened behind closed doors, and then President Biden can come out here and respond. But Wolf, just to give you a dynamic of where we are in Villa Lagrange. It is a park of several acres, and of course, the only people in here are the two delegations from each side, the two press delegations from each side as well. But we are separated. We are not with the Russian press corps. They are in a separate facility next to where they are going to have their press conference with Putin. We are in a separate facility over here where we are going to have our press conference with President Biden. And then the two leaders are somewhere in the middle at that villa having their actual talk. So it is notable if you just want to get a sense of how separated these things are and what the expectation of this summit is really going to be. Look at how they're keeping the two sides separate as opposed to, of course, what they did in Helsinki in 2018.
All right, Caitlin, we're going to get back to you. Don't go too far away. Our Moscow correspondent, Matthew Chance, is here in Geneva with all of us as well. He's inside the room where Putin will be holding his news conference. Give us a little sense of what you're hearing, Matthew.
Yeah, that's right, Wolf. Here we are in the tent, which is right next door to the Villa Lagrange, where the summit is taking place. And of course, it's where the Russian president will be staging his press conference within the past few minutes. We've all been brought in from outside, been told to take these spaced chairs in this auditorium. You can see quite a long way between the first row and the podium there, obviously where Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, will be coming out shortly. We don't know when. That will depend, obviously, on when the summit finally concludes. We're not at that point yet, but we were told originally that they were aiming for a press conference at around about 6 o'clock local time. So that's it's about 50 minutes from now. But obviously that was always with the caveat that it was going to be flexible, either earlier than that if the talks ended earlier, or later than that if they went on unexpectedly. In terms of the content of what's been discussed inside the villa between the two presidents, I mean, that kind of detail just isn't coming to us here from this vantage point here that we've been monitoring it from. We know that the broader format of the summit, which was pre-planned and negotiated, has been underway. What I'm not sure about from here, and I don't know what Caitlin Collins is hearing from her perspective, about whether there's been a one-on-one with the two presidents, without their broader delegations. I suspect not. We've certainly not heard about it from our vantage point here. But, make no mistake, whatever Vladimir Putin comes out with and whenever he gives this press conference and talks about what was discussed in this first face-to-face summit between the two presidents, he's not going to be able to get around the fact that there are huge issues and disagreements between the two sides, whether it's about election meddling, hacking, cyber attacks, whether it's about the situation in Ukraine, whether it's about the crackdown on opposition figures inside Russia. And it's going to be really interesting to hear, what was said to Vladimir Putin, first of all, in that summit by his US counterpart, and of course, how he responded. And so hopefully we're going to get some more clarity and detail on that in the hours ahead when this press conference finally happens, Wolf.
And we, of course, will have live coverage of both of these news conferences following the substantive discussions. Matthew, I hope you get to ask a question to Putin as well. This is going to be significant when we watch these news conferences. And as I said, we're going to have extensive live coverage of both of these news conferences. It's going to be interesting to see how they characterize what actually happened. Are they going to be upbeat? Are they going to be pessimistic? We're going to watch it very, very closely.
Yeah, you always have three stages of these summits, don't you? You have the expectations management going in, then you have the actual talks, and then you have the spin room afterwards, right, where each will do their best to claim victory. And perhaps they will have shared victories here. We don't know. Perhaps they'll have something that they can both hold up and say, we agreed to this. I do want to give one note based on who's in that room right now with Putin and Biden. It struck me that one of the people on the list is the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces, is a man named Valery Gerasimov. He's the architect of what's known as the Gerasimov Doctrine, which is basically Russia's strategy of sort of war below the threshold of war. Things like invading Ukraine, cyber attacks, that sort of thing. So all the things that are at issue between the U.S. and Russia. So in the room is the man behind that strategy, carrying out that strategy, discussing, and I'm sure it's something that Biden and his team noticed. Listen, if you're going to discuss those things, you need that person in the room. But by the way, that's the person who's currently carrying out that Russian strategy and the one that so bristles the Biden administration.
And as far as Ukraine is concerned, the Russians, Putin and his associates, they believe this is a done deal. They control Crimea. They think it's part of Russia, and it's over.
There is absolutely zero wiggle room for Russia on the issue of Ukraine. It's a non-starter. It's a conversation they don't want to have. It would be a deal breaker for them if NATO were, for example, to allow Ukraine to join. They see Ukraine as being part of ancient Rus, right? So they don't even see it as being a distinct and sovereign territorial area. I think Jim hit on such an interesting point, though, bringing up hybrid warfare, because this is a big part of what makes it so difficult to sit down at a summit like this and have this conversation, because so much of it is just below the level of typical warfare. And it's so easy to deny things, to obfuscate, to set up other actors to be responsible for things. It makes it incredibly difficult to actually pin them down and have a real conversation about what's been happening.
We're just learning now, and this is breaking news, the bilateral meeting that has the second session is now over We don't know what's going to happen next, but it's significant that we're now being told this second session is over, the bilateral meeting. I don't know if there's going to be a one-on-one or anything along those lines, but it looks like they're getting closer and closer to wrapping things up.
If it's the last session, and we don't know that, this would be shorter than the window that they gave us. They initially said 4 to 5 hours. If they started about 7:30, it was 90 minutes for the first session. I believe they took a 45-minute break in between to digest. That would put this session at around an hour, so less than advertised, which could be a sign. That said, we don't know. They could have moved quickly, or they could be planning to sit down again.
Or they might just be taking a break and then resuming the negotiations, maybe with a different cast of characters.
Yeah.
It's impossible for us to know, and we're obviously all sitting here on tenterhooks just waiting to see what's going to come of this, because there is so much suspense around the idea anytime you have a U.S. leader sitting down with President Vladimir Putin, who, when asked which great character from history he most identified with, said Peter the Great, who was the man who invaded the Caucasus, had a war in Ukraine, tightened control over the state, the ultimate czar. He is, as President Biden himself said, he is, quote, a worthy adversary. This is not going to be an easy meeting for any of the parties involved.
Let's go back to Caitlin Collins, our chief White House correspondent. Caitlin, I don't know if you're getting any more news, but it looks like this second broader session has wrapped up. We don't know what's happening next unless you know.
We have a few more details, actually, Wolf. So this is the second broader meeting. After that 2-on-2, essentially, between the two of them had come to an end, this second meeting started around 4 o'clock. They were supposed to have 2 of these bigger meetings, one followed by another. But now we are learning that that second bigger meeting has ended at 5:05 local. That's about an hour of a meeting that they just had. But they are not going to have the second bigger session. So that means we could be hearing from the Russian leader soon, given we do expect him to give his press conference first. So that means that they had that one meeting where it was President Biden, President Putin, their top 2 aides, including the Russian foreign minister and the Secretary of State. Then they took a little bit of a break and they came into the room with other officials. Those are those pictures that you just saw a few moments ago, where each delegation is seated across from each other. And so, of course, the question is, does this mean that they made substance? Should we be reading into the fact that they are not going to have a second bigger meeting, as was initially on the schedule? That really remains to be seen, given, of course, we know Matthew had been reporting that President Putin and the Russian side expected things to wrap up here around 6 p.m. local. And so we're waiting to see if we are going to see the Russian president come out soon. We should note that President Biden's car, the Beast, has been idling outside the villa for a few moments now. So that could be an indication as well that they are expecting this to wrap up soon. And that means we are going to very soon hear from these leaders on their readouts of what just happened in that first meeting between President Biden and President Putin since taking office, Wolf.
If, in fact, they have wrapped up their conversations for the day and they're about to begin their respective news conferences, it would be a lot less than earlier expected. We are expecting 4 to 5 hours of actual talks. That's clearly not going to necessarily happen. Is that right, Caitlin?
Yeah, that would be correct. That basically, they had essentially estimated about 4 to 5 hours of these talks going on. They did get started around 1:30, so not too much later than initially the White House had planned for this to start. They had been essentially back planning a plan B, that this could go a lot later in case the Russian president showed up late. But surprisingly, he did show up on time, which is not usually his character when meeting with U.S. presidents and other figures. But it does appear that these meetings could be at an end right now, Wolf. We're talking to the White House, and they say that there is not going to be a second larger breakout session as initially expected. So that would mean that these talks would have wrapped after just 2 meetings. One with just the leaders, essentially, with one top aide in the room, and then the second with the bigger delegations seated on each side of them. And there would not be a third meeting as initially expected. So that would mean that the Russian president is likely going to come out to where Matthew Chance is standing not too far from here and give his readout of how these meetings went.
And we'll have coverage, of course, of that. Jeff Zeleny is watching all of this unfold. He's not very far away. What are you picking up, Jeff?
Well, we are picking up, as Caitlin was reporting from Villa Lagrange, that the sessions in the meeting and the summit does indeed appear to be over, which is a little sooner than really any officials were expecting. The specific time of this, which of course will be recorded in history if these hold and they don't reconvene, let's go through this. 93 minutes for the first session. That was President Biden and Vladimir Putin one-on-one, of course, with their top envoy, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. So 93 minutes for that. The second session, they said, was 65 minutes for the second session. But a White House official is now telling pool reporters on the scene that it was actually just considered one meeting. That it was not actually considered a second bilateral event. So we are going to have to get more information on that. And I know Caitlin and others on our team are working to try and get a greater understanding of this. The White House press office is saying that now this was just one meeting. But Wolf, a bigger point here. Had the meeting gone longer today, there was more of a recognition that more of these issues perhaps could have been discussed. But again, this is a reminder of the expectation setting for all of this. This is the opening of a dialogue, in fact, a chance for President Biden to see if President Putin wanted to engage, if he detected some sense of a stable relationship. We knew that Russia and President Putin were not going to give on many of these issues or find really any common ground, but it was a sense of, can they at least stabilize this deeply deteriorating relationship? And that remains an open question. And we will likely see both leaders now explaining their own point of view, spinning, if you will, their own point of view here. But this certainly has caught several people, officials in the White House, and frankly, reporters off guard a bit that this ended as quickly. We did see the motorcade, the presidential motorcade in front, and it had been repositioned. So that was a sense that perhaps things are wrapping up here. So we will get more information as this goes on. But we do know, Wolf. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just want to be precise, about 2.5 hours, an hour and a half or so for the first round, another hour, a little bit more, 65 minutes for the second round, a little bit more than 2.5 hours. That's a lot less than 4 to 5 hours that officials have been speculating these talks would go on. Do we know for sure they are done for the day? Is that right, Jeff?
It does seem that they are done for the day, Wolf. And just again, apologize for looking down here at our reporting, but a White House official is saying there was only one meeting and it was not split into two. So we're not exactly sure if that's semantics or exactly what that means, but this was expected to go on a bit longer, but we are not seeing any indications from either U.S. officials or hearing from Russian officials that these talks are expected to continue, that they're in some type of a break or something. That is not what it seems. It seems like the summit is indeed over, and now both leaders will come at some point and present their cases. Now, that may not be urgently. I was talking to White House officials earlier today, and they said that they want to digest this information. They did not have a communications person as part of the delegation, the White House press secretary or communications director, which was not true on the other side. The Russian press secretary was in the delegation. So no question, the U.S. is going to digest this. So this press conference is certainly not forthcoming. It could be quite some time from now. But as far as our understanding is right now, Wolf, this summit is over. The sessions are over, and of course we'll hear from them at some point here today in Geneva. But certainly, Wolf, as you can see from your vantage point in Geneva, I'm struck by just the calm and utter quiet in this city. The city has indeed been shut down. There's no traffic in this area. Things are very quiet, with anticipation, of course, of what these leaders will say when they say it, Wolf.
Yeah, I got here on Sunday, and there's marked difference between what was going on then and clearly what's going on in Geneva right now for understandable security reasons. Caitlin Collins is getting more information for us. What else are you learning, Caitlin?
Well, Wolf, as of about 5 minutes ago, the Russians were still inside Villa Lagrange where these meetings took place. Of course, things are changing pretty quickly around here right now, but that would give indication that both sides are still there. It's not clear where President Biden is going to hold while President Putin gives his press conference, because he is expected to go first. But Wolf, when you look at those press conferences, that's going to give us a pretty good readout of what happened in these meetings. How do these two sides each spin their version of what went on behind closed doors doors with press not in the room. And I think it could also give an indication of where these talks are going to go, because the White House has said that's why President Biden wanted to have this summit, to essentially take Putin's temperature to see where the U.S. relationship is going to go and what it's going to look like under his tenure. And so if Putin comes out and is aggressive and uses his tone that he has just a few days ago in that first U.S. interview that he did, the first one he's done in 3 years, where he denied that Russia had any connection to those ransomware hackings. He said there was no proof of election interference on their behalf, even though there is a lot of proof. He downplayed human rights abuses and, of course, wouldn't even name Alexei Navalny, who the opposition leader who is in jail right now in Russia. So the question is, does he come out and use that tone? What does he say? The U.S. does have the advantage here of having Putin go first, because they will be able to watch him go and then come out and give their version of what happened after having already listened to him. And we do expect at that point that Putin is going to get back on his plane, go back to Sochi, and we do expect President Biden to get back on Air Force One tonight and return to Washington. So we're still waiting on that actual movement to happen. We are not seeing it here so far. Of course, the Russian delegation and the Russian press corps has already gathered in that room for their press conference. And so we're still waiting for that, Wolf. But right now we do know these talks have ended, the summit is over, and now we're waiting on the press conferences.
And Jeff Zeleny is getting more details on it as well. What else are you picking up, Jeff?
Wolf, as Caitlin was just reporting there, we do have, again now, let us repeat this, a White House official is telling CNN that the summit is over. The summit has ended. The talks have concluded. So this is ends the era of uncertainty if there could be just a break and then going into more discussion. So we do know now that the talks between President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin, their first face-to-face talks, have indeed ended. It did not go the 5 hours that we thought it would. And it also appears to be in one session as opposed to two sessions. So this is certainly a more abbreviated conversation than certainly both sides were advertising and indeed anticipating. So again, now the waiting for how this will be explained, how this will be framed going forward. But the summit has ended. And Wolf, it is just as you know, before noontime in Washington, talking to officials back at the White House. They're watching this very carefully as well. It's just before the dinner hour here at the end of the late afternoon. And Lake Geneva, which is normally packed at this hour, is now empty, all being closed down. So there is anticipation of at some point, since the summit's ended, people will move on and Geneva can get back to its regular day. But for now, at least, how both of these sides, how the Kremlin and how the White House explain really what both sides got out of this is so critical. We do know that President Putin has been elevated by having this meeting with President Biden. Now, of course, we'll be watching very carefully to see what the White House and President Biden say in terms of what this summit did for them, if in fact anything at all. Wolf?
Yeah, and as we know, President Putin, after his news conference, he'll fly back to Russia. President Biden, after his news conference, will fly back to Washington and wrap things up. Clarissa, it's a lot shorter than we thought. They're saying it was one meeting. Well, first part of the meeting with the Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister, the four of them, there was a broader part of the meeting when other officials came in. But if it was only a little bit more than 2.5 hours, that's a lot shorter than we thought. And let's not forget, Putin, while he understands English, he really doesn't speak English. So they had to do everything through interpreters, Russian and English interpreters. And that sort of cuts the time in half, really, because you got to wait until each sentence is translated.
If you notice in that second picture, though, that we saw, they're wearing the headpieces, indicating that they were getting simultaneous
Well, that would be
translation.
important.
So that might have saved them some time. But frankly, I mean, let's just go through some of the host of issues they're supposed to be hashing out. Ukraine, human rights, cyber, misinformation, climate change, prisoner swap, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, reinstating ambassadors. I mean, how...
Hold on a second. There we see the President Biden getting into his limousine. He is wrapped up. He is leaving there. I assume he's going to go somewhere and wait until he has his news conference. But there he is, the President of the United States. He has left that Villa Lagrange here in Geneva, and he's going to be heading over someplace. I guess, Clarissa and Jim, he's going to be consulting a little bit with his top aides right now. They're going to be coming up with a game plan, what they should tell the American people, indeed the world, at this news conference.
And it's going to be very interesting to hear what they say, because as I just ran through that laundry list of issues, you're trying to imagine how it would be possible that they could have had substantive conversations about all of those issues, frankly, even half of those issues, in the truncated time slot that we saw. One even has to wonder if perhaps things didn't go as well as possible, if there was some kind of a disagreement, or, I mean, who knows? It's not a point to speculate on, but certainly doesn't feel like enough time to really get to the nub of it.
What strikes me as notable is not having the breakout sessions with lower level officials, right? Because it could be material, because those would be the sessions where you hammer out the details of whatever big picture things were agreed to. For instance, if you're talking about humanitarian assistance to Syria, here's how we're going to do it and when. If you're talking about setting some rules of the road for cyber attacks, here's how we're going to do it. So not having those breakout sessions, that could be notable here. Again, it's possible they had faster progress than anyone expected on some of these bigger picture issues in there. But let's be frank, this is a shorter window than White House officials themselves were describing as a likely scenario, 4 to 5 hours. And at the same time saying, hey, and who knows, it may go even longer. Stay on for the ride. So this may be...
It sounds like that motorcade is going right by where we are right now. We saw the President of the United States leaving that area and heading over to presumably consult and then get ready for his news conference. Gloria Borger is our chief political analyst. She's joining us from Washington right now. Gloria, let me get your thoughts on what we are witnessing right now, what we are experiencing covering this summit.
Well, look, Wolf, the run-up to the summit has been a huge expectations game, as we all know. And the expectation setting was really done by the White House. There was disagreement inside about whether Joe Biden should actually have this meeting with Vladimir Putin. He decided he wanted to have it. And I think the question they're probably asking themselves right now, whether this was, in fact, a risk worth taking. It seems to me, and from listening to you guys and just watching Joe Biden's body language as he got in the car, is that this was shorter, and that as a result, and again, we can only speculate, and it serves no purpose. We'll learn eventually that they didn't get to cover Clarissa's laundry list of topics, and the White House went in expecting hours and hours and hours of sessions. Now, I've watched Joe Biden for a very long time. I do know that, for example, when he met with Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, he famously walked out of a dinner and threw his napkin on the table. He has met with Putin and told him, you have no soul. So the question I have is, what did they talk about at first that seemed to be truncating this meeting? And I think we can all agree, given what the White House was saying, and maybe Putin's people never thought the meeting was going to be as long as Biden's people did, because they came in with a very robust agenda. But what is it that occurred that cut the meeting short? Did they not have more to talk about? Did they decide that perhaps their staffs needed to meet and talk at some later date? I mean, we just don't know. But for a White House that has put an awful lot into this, I would think that the length of the meeting is probably pretty disappointing at this point.
You know, Jim, a reporter shouted a question to President Biden as he was leaving. How did it go? And he said, and I'm quoting now, "I'll talk about it in a bit." He didn't want to say.
No,
he could have said good, could have said bad. He said, "I'll talk about it in a bit."
Well, that's why these press conferences are going to be very key to watch, and they would be under any circumstances. But if it was disappointing, right? Let's look at the words of Putin and Biden for how they describe it. Now, they could surprise us on the upside and have something to announce here. But again, as we were saying, it is shorter than advertised, than the already very mild expectations that were set by the Biden administration, White House officials going into this.
Christiana Manpour is joining us right now, our chief international anchor. Christiana, let me get your thoughts on this historic day. What do you think?
You know, Wolf, we have covered these incredible summits for the last many, many decades. I think first we have to acknowledge that President Biden's job is to defend democracy against rising autocracies around the world. That he did something very different than President Trump. Instead of going to an adversary like Saudi Arabia as his first foreign trip, he went here to Cornwall and the G7 to allies, then to NATO in Brussels, then on to the EU summit, gathered all his backers, all his team, so to speak, behind him before going to talk to President Putin. There is no way that anybody expected that either Putin and Biden were going to resolve their massive differences, whether it's over 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 5 hours, or what. And so we really do have to see what are the crumbs or what are the significant middling results that may have been achieved or none at all. It is possible. You remember the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in Reykjavik was declared a complete disaster. It ended up not being such a disaster in the fullness of time. But these are, they're difficult meetings. They're high-stakes gambles. Each side has potentially intractable objectives. On the other hand, there are areas where they do have common interests, whether it's climate, whether it's potentially humanitarian assistance in Syria, and whether it's some of the other things, who knows, maybe the Iran nuclear deal, that they can potentially, in arms control, have some meeting of the minds on. But, everybody realized that this was a gamble by Biden. But what's the objective, or rather, what's the alternative? Do you not engage with one of the most important leaders and one of the most important, in this case, adversaries, particularly at a time when NATO, in its most recent communique just this week, declared Russia the biggest threat? It's never done that before, and it's never used that particular language. So it was going to be so interesting to hear what they both say from their separate perspectives in their press conferences.
Christiane, we're showing our viewers some live pictures coming in where President Putin will be holding his news conference in that tent over there. Matthew Chance is on the scene. I hope he gets to ask a question. Putin will make a statement that answer reporters' questions. You and I have covered Putin over the years. He could have a news conference that could be relatively short, but he could go on and on and on. Sometimes he spends an hour or 2 hours at these respective news conferences, right?
Yeah, I mean, clearly for Putin, the news conference, his presser will be all about his domestic audience. Putin has made a career out of confronting America. Don't forget, many people around the world believe America is the one at fault. I mean, we can argue that till the cows come home. But Putin has successfully positioned himself and Russia as pretty much the only global leader willing to hold the United States superpower to account and actively, materially try to destabilize the United States, whether it's militarily, whether it's annexing territory, whether it's cyber and that warfare and the hacking of major American installations and elections, whatever it is. It is considered by some Putin's aim to have at least a perception of a conflict with America that he's in control of, and he comes out, the chest-beating patron of those who would challenge the United States. He will be talking to his own domestic audience, but it is significant that the United States won, or at least asked, and got the agreement from Putin that he would come first to the meeting, would not hold up the whole affair, would not keep Biden, the president, waiting, that there would be separate news conferences because the Americans did not want a repeat of the disaster and the debacle of Putin running circles around Trump in Helsinki, which we were all at. So, some of these issues are important that have already taken place.
You're absolutely right, Christiane. Don't go too far away. We're going to get back to you shortly. But Caitlin Collins, our chief White House correspondent, where the U.S. delegation is here in Geneva. I assume President Biden is over there following the summit. The summit is now wrapped up. What else are you learning, Caitlin?
Well, we saw President Biden leave. He gave a thumbs up to the press. Of course, the question is, what does that say about this summit? He is expected to tell us shortly, but not until the Russian leader has actually briefed their press corps and gone over his talking points of how this meeting went. What we do know right now is that we had seen the presidential limo idling outside the villa for a few moments before Biden actually came out and got into it. Clearly an indication that the talks were wrapping up before officials officially let reporters know that, yes, the summit had come to an end. And right now we can see the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken's motorcade is right outside where we are standing in front of this camera right now. We saw the Secretary of State get out of his vehicle. We have not seen the president from over here in this perspective, but Wolf, we are told he's expected to hold nearby while President Putin gives his press conference. And so right over here is where the presidential motorcade is. It's just not far from us as they are waiting to see what Putin says about his view, essentially, of how this summit went. Now, it is a lot shorter than what the White House expected. The question is whether or not we should be reading into that and whether it means these talks went well or whether they went poorly. Because, of course, the White House had been downplaying expectations beforehand. They were not setting any kind of a high bar, essentially the opposite of it, Wolf. It's essentially you had these officials telling reporters, don't expect a lot to come out of this. So the question of whether or not they actually achieved anything and got any substance here or made any progress on those areas where they do feel they had mutual interest remains to be seen, because this was President Biden's idea to hold this summit. He is the one who initiated this and invited President Putin before those weeks of deliberations between the two sides happened. And so there were a lot of issues on the table where they do not agree and where White House officials said nothing was off the table. Expect President Biden to confront Putin over election interference, Belarus, this ransomware hacking, imprisoning political prisoners, detaining Americans, but also they wanted to talk about areas where they feel they can cooperate. This wasn't just a session for Biden to come over here and lash out at, Putin over all of the things that they believe he's done wrong. They wanted to actually try to find some common ground. We're seeing some Secret Service, Wolf, around here. We are not actually seeing the president though yet, so we're waiting on him, but we do not expect to see him until after Putin has given that press conference.
We are just told, Caitlin, and I'll share with you and I'll share with our viewers around the world, a White House official has told the White House press pool, that the first session between the two presidents went 93 minutes. They then took a 45-minute break, and then the second session lasted for 65 minutes at 5:05 p.m. local time. Right now, it's 5:41 p.m. local time. At 5:05, it broke up. The summit has ended. The two leaders have gone their respective ways. We're waiting for these two news conferences to start. Matthew Chance is over with the Russians right now, where the Putin news conference will take place. Set the scene over there, Matthew, for us. I understand you're in a tent over there, and you're getting ready, presumably, to start asking questions once Putin shows up.
Yeah, that's right. I'm in a tent. We can't get our video signal up right now, so I'm speaking to you on the telephone. But I can tell you, there's quite a lot of anticipation building here in this tent, where it's been set up to stage the President Putin solo press conference following this summit. And already the room is, of course, filled with journalists, mainly journalists from Russia, but some international journalists as well, because this is the Kremlin pool that this press conference was originally intended for, but the Kremlin opened it up to allow me and a few other of my international colleagues in as well. And I can also tell you that a number of the key delegates, parts of the Russian delegation, members of the Russian delegation, have already come in to the press conference, and they're sitting along the side of the room, waiting for President Putin to enter. Amongst them is the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. He's sitting there just about 10, 15 meters away from me. Obviously, he was a key figure in this summit. He accompanied President Putin in that first sort of narrow format leg of the summit, along with President Biden, who was accompanied by Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State. There's a couple of other interesting people. I mean, the names may not be familiar to our viewers, but the commander of the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces is sitting right in front of me, Valery Gerasimov, and that's significant as well. So clearly he was part of the broader negotiations or the broader talks that were had inside this summit. There's also a figure, a very much lesser known figure called Dmitry Kozak, who's in front of me as well. And that's interesting to those of us that watch Russia closely, because he's been the lead figure when it comes to the negotiations on the Donbass, the situation in eastern Ukraine. And so clearly that subject requiring his particular expertise was something that was that was broached, we assume, by his presence during this summit. Also, you can see in front of me Anatoly Antonov, and he is the Russian ambassador to the United States. But of course, for several months now, he's been in Russia. He's not been at his post in Washington because neither country has an ambassador at their posts in their respective capitals at the moment. And so that's perhaps something that may come out positive from this meeting. It was the thing that was perhaps the easiest win when it came to discussing what deliverables, I think we're calling them now, aren't we? What could come out of this meeting? Well, we'll see when Vladimir Putin comes into this auditorium under the tent. It's absolutely sweltering hot in here, I can tell you, even though there are air conditioners pumping out, or struggling with the high temperatures outside here on Lake Geneva. But, we're expecting, now that the summit is over, that Vladimir Putin will appear shortly and start to tell us how that summit, that first historic summit with President Biden, actually went.
Yeah, we expect this news conference with President Putin to begin very shortly. All of his top aides, including Sergei Lavrov, the